Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a frontline update for the 6th of March 2023. Before we go to the northeast sector where we start our roundup of the front lines, I just want to do a little bit of chat about what the ISW say. The ISW don't produce their accumulation, so their aggregation of sources for the front line on a Monday because it's Sunday the day before, but they do have their daily report as a discussion piece, and actually there's some really useful stuff in here. So they first of all, they're saying that Ukrainian forces are likely conducting a limited tactical withdrawal in Bakhmut, although it is still too early to assess Ukrainian intentions concerning a complete withdrawal from the city. I talked about this in my news update this morning, that they've almost certainly used deception to say we're still staying, all the time, actually removing troops and equipment from Bakhmut. Now, this is, as Mick Ryan was talking about in his thread on how to do, decent operational withdrawals. These retrograde actions often entail quite a bit of deception, which is, we're staying, we're here to stay, we're going to defend, we've made the calculation, but actually that's, telling the Russians that whilst actually withdrawing to some extent. To what extent? We're not quite sure. Are they going to remain in Bakhmut to some degree east of the river? I don't know. Anyway, so the ISW do some discussion about Bakhmut and that, but what I find interesting is their discussion about the change of opinion of some of the Russian military bloggers, and a bit of a course correction for them in what their narrative is. So they're saying the Russian military's attritional campaign to capture Bakhmut has likely prompted Russian mill bloggers to adopt a more realistic expectation for further Russian operations in Ukraine. So a Russian military blogger claimed that Russian forces would likely have to conduct short operational pause following the potential capture of Bakhmut. Another prominent Russian mill blogger offered a more ambitious assessment that Russian forces would take Kostantinivka by the end of spring 2023. Just to let you know where Kostantinivka is, it is just to the west of Bakhmut. So you've got Bakhmut there. It'll be by the end of spring they could take Konstantinivka. Just think how long it's taken them to take Bakhmut. And launch an offensive on the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration between the summer and autumn fall of 2023. Even this relatively ambitious assessment contrasts with previous high expectations from Russian mill bloggers, many of whom claim that the entire Ukrainian front line around Bakhmut would collapse and Ukrainian forces would fall back to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk following the Russian capture of the small settlement of Soledar northeast of Bakhmut on January the 11th. I had pro-Russian voices on my threads saying exactly this. Just like this is the beginning of the end, and actually there's nothing between Bakhmut realistically and Kyiv. We're talking about like it was just going to be dominoes after that. My goodness, they can barely even take Bakhmut, let alone Kostantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk. This is going to be absolutely draining for the Russians, and they have exhausted themselves, I would say, in taking Bakhmut alone. So it'd be funny to see all the claims of cope and all this from pro-Russians in the threads, but just the reality is you ain't done squat. You've taken Bakhmut, but that has really limited operational value. And this kind of readjustment of the narrative, I think, is really important. So Russian mill bloggers, it continues, similarly shifted to more conservative expectations focused on the immediate capture of specific settlements as the highly attritional campaign to capture Lysychansk and Severodonetsk in the summer of 2022 progressed and the overall offensive culminated. So likewise, they did that there. They realized how difficult it was to take those places and adjusted their prognosis for the situation accordingly. 9 months, it continues, of highly attritional, slow Russian advances in the Bakhmut area have likely heavily informed these increasingly realistic and constrained Russian mill blogger assessments. The Russian military will nevertheless likely fail to meet Russian mill bloggers' expectations despite these more realistic assessments. The timeline offered by even the most ambitious assessment suggests that Russian campaigning to capture all of Donetsk Oblast would be a years-long effort, and it goes on. But I think that's really super important. So the idea that there's been this theory that supposedly Putin said that the Russians would have to take the whole of the Donbass um, by the end of March. It's just never going to happen. Um, the Donbass being, for those who need it more clearly signified on the map. Goodness me, this laptop really needs to be sorted out. That is the whole of Donbass there, and it obviously goes on behind the lines. You've got Luhansk up to the north, and Donetsk. Donetsk is separated here, but both of these need to be taken for that kind of minimalist approach to the war in Ukraine. Now, if you're going to take all of this area here on top of what you've already got, and bearing in mind it's taken 6 months to not quite take Bakhmut. I don't know how you can expect to then just go on and take Sloviansk and Kramatorsk like that, as if these dominoes are just going to fall, everything's going to crumble. The Ukrainians have been sparingly reinforcing Bakhmut, it appears, to allow them to carry out two large counteroffensives. One things I think, and they could throw an awful lot more at Bakhmut if they really wanted. However, there are claims that they are throwing some newly mobilized people without much equipment and training there as well. So there are problems. It's not plain sailing for the Ukrainians, obviously, but it is clearly not plain sailing for the Russians. So I just think you'll necessarily have to see an adjustment of their narrative, unless they just want to continue to live in Cloud Cuckoo Land, which they might do. As we come and look at the map in the northeast sector, so this is Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina on the War Mapper map. That is Kupiansk, Svatova, Kremina. Really is very little news. The only thing I can find of note is some, and I don't know whether Poulet Volant here is using War Mapper. I told you the other day that War Mapper claimed that Hranikivka is now contested up in this area near Dvorichne, and which is northeast of Kupiansk, near Liman Pershi. Poulet Volant is the only map that I've seen, the only other source that I've seen that says something about this. Otherwise, no one's really mentioned it. So we could have a situation whereby this tiny little salient that the Russians have gained going towards Dvorichne, and there may have been a counterattack, and Hranikivka is now contested. But again, I haven't changed my map because I just haven't had any real detail about that. Other than that, there's just no news about anything going on to Kremina. There's fighting in the forest south of Kremina and around Nevsky and Terny and towards this area, but it is basically, it seems like it's positional fighting and no real news to write home about. And so effectively, you can look at the Poulet Volant maps. They show not a lot of change in Svatova, no red arrows at all, which means there's no real activity. I haven't heard anything about Kuzumivka and Novoselivska at all over the last week, really. And then as you come down towards Kremina, as I say, towards Nevska and in the forest area, there's fighting going on there, but no really explicit detail. And then we get down to Bakhmut, where obviously it's where all the news is concentrated. So let's move down to that area. We're going to pass Spirna and Berestova, Vesele, Rostelivka, Fedorivka, and come down and look at Bakhmut. Okay, let's try and orient ourselves. So we've got Bakhmut city here and the northern areas towards Bodanivka and Kromova. Lots of pressure there. There's been some gains of territory for the Russians here, but that's the only real gains I've seen around Bakhmut over the last 24 hours. There's pressure quite a lot in the south and southwest towards this road, the T0504, as it comes into Bakhmut. There are some claims that basically the Russians have the entire area to the east of the Bakhmutivka River, but I don't know whether that is true of this sort of little pocket of resistance still there, and some area down in the southeast there. let's go and have a look at a few different sources on this. So Andrew Perpetua says the greater Bakhmut area is without much change, perhaps small advances towards Bodanivka, a few hundred meters perhaps, and that's towards the northwest there. He says Russian control over the eastern side of Bakhmutivka River is growing. One of my sources told me Russia controls the entire eastern side of the river, but I cannot confirm that. So that's just what I was saying there. And then he goes on to Avdivka. Poulet-Volant's map is there, shows an increasing pressure from the Russians on the eastern side, and then moving again towards Bodanivka, and even north of there towards Hryhorivka, to perhaps engage the Ukrainians in a larger encirclement of Chaziv Yar eventually. So that's Poulet-Volant. Defmon says, pro-Ukrainian source, that there are repelled attacks in all areas, no particular change. Noel reports another pro-Ukrainian source says northwest of Bakhmut, the situation has deteriorated. Russian troops have reached the outskirts of Orikhovo-Vasilivka. The fate of Dubovo-Vasilivka just south of this is not clear, but it is suspected that this small hamlet is in the hands of Russian troops waiting for confirmation. That is what I've had in Russian hands for some time. I actually pulled my map back a little bit today to give that contested. So this is this little village of Dubovo-Vasilivka. So you're saying that could well be under Russian hands. I've, as I said, had that for a few days, but pulled it back just to be a little bit more conservative. But it wouldn't surprise me. A lot of pressure up here, as according to Noel reports. And he goes on to say around Yahidne, north of Bakhmut, the situation seems to be under control for the time being, and the advance there into the city has been temporarily stopped. There are no news about parts taken by Russian troops. The situation remains fluid. Now, this is interesting because this was a supposedly flooded area, but we haven't really heard much about that since. But actually, there's been no movement in this northern area. That has, it appears, been stopped for a good, 3 or 4 days now. He goes on to say, in the east, the Ukrainians are still fighting, just with fewer resources than before. Clearly, the choice has been made to move the bulk of the troops to the other side of the Bakhmutivka River, while mobile assault groups in Zabamutka district continue to carry out targeted attacks. And in the south, despite the pressure, the situation is okay, I've been told. Fighting mainly takes place around a gas station, the cemetery, and north of Opitny. Russian troops try to force a breakthrough to make the T-0504 in the direction of Konstantinivka inaccessible. And then he goes on to talk about elsewhere. In fact, we can get rid of that now. So this is to say that there is fighting still all around the south here, but not too much movement. And as I said, the only area I've got, which is from Syriac maps, let's go and find that. Syriac maps here. Is some gained territory just to the north of the art winery, leaving this pocket still in Ukrainian hands, apparently. So we'll go and have a look at that on Warmapper map. The Warmapper map isn't always the most current, so although it's really nice visually, quite easy to use, it doesn't have, for example, this area being taken by the Russians there, although that that is coming from a Russian source. But you can see how difficult it will be for the Ukrainians. Let's look at main supply routes. This is quite a useful little map. Where are you? So here you can see the difficulty it is to get the Ukrainian troops and equipment out of there safely. You've got the two main supply routes. So this has twisted the map slightly. So now we're looking into Bakhmut from the west here, and this is Chaziv Yar. You've got the main two supply routes that will be, concrete roads, tarmac roads, and then these smaller roads are, I believe, mud roads, really, and they are really quite difficult for vehicles to use. I wonder whether this is one of them. So this is an example of a Ukrainian convoy of mainly, I think the military are using them, but they're mainly civilian vehicles. These are Ukrainian troops here, but just checking out this convoy that's been pretty much taken out. There's no dead bodies or anything, so I don't know exactly what's happened here, but these mud roads are difficult. Easier when it's frozen, but the last couple of days it's been thawing, so this is probably a few days old now. It looks really muddy in the area, and difficult. So if you're trying to get troops out there en masse, you are going to struggle, and equipment as well. Was there another that I've got some other videos somewhere, but yeah, it is difficult. It will be difficult to do a quick, successful operational withdrawal, given that these roads have been compromised or are in really bad state. The Ukrainians have been fighting to get the T04, T0504, this southern one here. So I'll go back to my map to show you this southern one. So we were looking there going into Bakhmut, and you have these two main supply routes. They've been fighting to get this one um, to have a buffer zone around that, so they can use that more. Although it's quite difficult around there, but you can access it then coming down. It's just going to be difficult. And then throw into that the claims that actually things have not been particularly good for the troops in Bakhmut for some time. I've reported this in my news segment this morning. So this is Michael Kaufman and Rob Lee, who've been in Bakhmut recently, saying that it looks really difficult. Artillery ammo shortages, contested lines of communication, attritional battle, unfavourable terrain. All not looking good. And then I'm going to talk about this in my Ukraine War Update Extra video, which is a Kiev Independent article saying actually it's been really tough in Bakhmut. You've got a lot of people who are not trained being mobilized, who've been thrown onto frontline. Comms are bad. Ammunition is bad. Support is bad. Drones have been attrited really, really badly. And so, things aren't going as well for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut as you'd imagine, which is why, as I said before, why they're pulling out, right? They have effectively lost Bakhmut, or they are on the cusp of losing Bakhmut. How long they stay, if we look at the war map amount, it's probably the easiest. How long they stay in that area to the west of this river. They pull out of this. Some claims that they have already pulled out of this area entirely. Whether they try and hold on to this area and get further breathing space around the main supply route coming in through Ivaniska, I don't know. But the Russians are incrementally taking that territory to the north, which will render staying in Bakhmut really, really problematic, because you'll effectively be encircled, or mainly encircled. So that's Bakhmut. It's definitely a challenge there, but I'm pretty confident that they are doing at least a partial withdrawal at the moment. There's lots of footage of forces removing themselves from Bakhmut, and whether they are leaving a rear guard there, I don't know. We'll see. Or whether they are going to, as I say, defend the west of Bakhmut, I'm not sure. Anyway, let's move on to Avdiivka and further down south. So just before I do, this is the ISW map, or part of their interactive map that suggests, so that when they have it in yellow is a Russian claim. So there is a Russian claim that they control the entire area to the east of the Bakhmutivka River. That doesn't mean that they do. That is a Russian claim that they do. So anyway, I forgot to show you that map. Goodness me, and like Colombo, a final thing. Rebar aren't posting on Twitter at the moment. They're posting on Telegram, and they possibly are referring to this. So this is Defmon says it's hard to tell who this is, but I think it's Ukrainians in this video. This is exactly what I expected from General Suriskis' visit to Bakhmut. So he's a bit of a critic of the general, and Defmon thinks the Ukraine should have pulled out earlier from Bakhmut. This is supposedly a failed Ukraine military counterattack near Bakhmut, and you can see it there. And while you watch that, I'll then read what Rebar said on Telegram, which is during a withdrawal. So they are claiming that the Ukrainians are withdrawing from Bakhmut. During the withdrawal from the fortified areas of Ivanivska, 2 enemy groups were intercepted and destroyed by Wagner PMC units. As a result of the swift battle, Ukrainian losses amounted to about 30 people killed and more than 60 wounded. So that is what Rebar say. Possibly referring to this is some counterattack near Ivanivska. It could well be, not 100% sure. Right, I really am going to get to Avdiivka now. Ugh. Now, when it comes to Avdiivka, have we come out of Bakhmut? There have been these attacks, so going to come down south past Shumi and New York to Avdiivka here. Now, I don't have a big old salient here for the Russians there, but a couple of mappers do. Andrew Perpetua does. So he has this big salient that has taken territory north of Pervomaisky towards north of Vodyany towards Siverny. And he says in the Avdiivka area, Russia is attacking Bakhmutivka. This is up the north of Avdiivka, Krasnohorivka, Kamyanka, Siverny, and Pervomaisky, all with minimal, if any, changes. Although that is a big change to my map. And Poulet-Volant also has that here, this large Russian-controlled area. But Deep State Map doesn't have that. I haven't actually heard that from anywhere else. We have heard that the Russians have been attacking towards Siverny, not that they've actually taken the land in any serious way. So that would be, I think, quite significant if the Russians do control all of this land here, because although it doesn't mean that they've surrounded Avdiivka, it starts looking a little bit more like Bakhmut. So I don't know. I haven't changed my map, but it could be that that Ukraine have lost that land to the Russians. But if you look here at Defmon's map, for example, you got a little bit of land taken to north of Vodyany, but not nearly as much. So I might look at adapting my map. We shall see. Now, there has been a lot of activity to the north of Avdiivka in the Novobakhmutivka area, which is up here, and the Krasnohorivka area. There has been, and I showed you a little bit of this. Here's a Russian breakthrough attempt repelled by Ukrainian presidential brigade near Novobakhmutivka. These guys have done a couple of apparently the Ukrainian presidential brigade, a couple of big repulsions of the Russians in the area. So the Russians have lost quite a lot of equipment here. I'm going to just forward through here because I don't want to show you like Ukrainian IEDs taking out like individual people and stuff. But you get there's quite a lot of here. You can see quite a lot of material that's been taken out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 tank, 5 IFVs have been taken out at some point. Now, although this is an IED hitting what has already been abandoned and partially destroyed, these have been taken out in that area at some point recently. So there is quite a lot of destruction that's taking place in the area. And that goes towards feeding those figures that are released on a daily basis. Okay, so as we go on with Andrew Perpetua, because he's got some quite up-to-date maps of the area, the attack toward Pervomaisky from Vodyany, highlighted arrow, seems to be having the best results for Russia in this area. Russia is also attacking Novelska, where they hope to eventually break through Ukrainian defenses. So far, failure. He says that I have recorded some increase in Russian territory near Novelsky, as you can see just there. So Novelsky is this tiny little, very rural settlement. I think you've got some rural warehousing there, farming land and whatnot. So, but every tree line around here is entrenched. There's, dug in entrenchments all along these lines. So it's very difficult. It's not so easy to take this, especially without a huge amount of materiel and actually combined arms offensive. So yeah, some land taken by the Russians in Novelsky, a little bit here and there, and some advances made, I think, north of this watercourse towards Pervomaisky as well. So if we go back to Andrew Perpetua, he's saying that by these arrows there is, well, at least they're attempting, but he's saying they have been repelled so far. He says, in my opinion, Russia is trying to break through Novelsky so that they can attack the city of Krasnohorivka. So this is another Krasnohorivka, which is actually south of Pervomaisky, between Mariinka and Avdiivka. So by attacking Novelska, it opens up a flanking attack on Krasnohorivka, as well as being able to surround Pervomaisky. Without Novelsky, Pervomaisky seems to be too difficult for the Russians to take. So Novelsky, as small as that is a really important settlement for the Russians to take, and it's exactly the same with Pobjeda to the south of Mariinka. These kind of little settlements open up large areas of land and allow the Russians to flank and encircle their targets like Mariinka and Pervomaisky, and arguably Krasnohorivka as well. But he goes on to say, and this is just going back down south to the Mariinka area. In the Mariinka area, Russia is continuing to attack Mariinka itself without much progress. They're destroying buildings in the city one at a time, and there aren't many left, trying to break the Ukrainian defense. They're also attacking south towards Pobjeda. There may be Russian progress here toward the town. They have reached the town with assault groups before, but were beaten back. The more recent attacks may have dug into new positions. I'm not sure. So then he goes on to say, Russia is attacking Pobjeda in an effort to bypass Mariinka. I think they would likely attack south toward Konstantinivka, so that's another Konstantinivka. They really do need to get a greater range of names. And north towards Hirivka and Khorokhovo if they capture Pobjeda. But he goes on to say, this string of settlements behind Mariinka and the ones behind Novomykhailivka will be difficult to take. Are serious impediment to Russia's advance in that area. So let's put that all into the context of my map. So there are repelled attacks all around Avdiivka, but the Russians might have made some very minor gains around the Vodyane and Novelsky area, and they could indeed have land all the way up to Severny there, but I'm not 100% sure of that yet. And these will be attempts to take these small settlements like Pobjeda and Novelsky to encircle Krasnohorivka, and then take these strings of settlements. So strings of settlements along this water line here, going back from Mariinka, and also along back from Novomykhailivka. But that's difficult. It's difficult to take long, thin settlements as opposed to individual settlements like Avdiivka. So where they've tried to take Pervomaisky, going back there, because it's long and thin, they really, really struggle. And it will be the same to the west of Mariinka and to the west of Novomykhailivka. But of course, if you want the whole of Donbass, you've got to take all of these places. And goodness me, I'm going back to saying what I've said before. It's like, if this is a Russian offensive, like it's going to take them years to take the Donbass, let alone by the end of March. I can't see any way, any other way out of that. Anyway, Poulet Volon's maps, other than showing that large area there, don't show too much else. There's not a lot going on in Vuhledar, and they have actually got the Russians not controlling that area to the south of Vuhledar, these dachas. So if we come down around the corner here and have a look at Vuhledar, I have, in line with Syriac maps, and I don't think this is accurate now, the Russians having control of this area there, but no other mappers have that, so I don't think that's the case. I might move that back today. And there is some interesting footage from Radio Free Europe interviewing some people in the Vuhledar area. I'll just get that for you. Radio Free Europe do a bunch of really good videos, actually, that are very interesting and often get views of people fighting on the front line. Here, this is a guy in a trench in the Vuhledar area. Someone's had a go at me for saying Vuhledar with too much of with a K, and it should be Vuhledar. But actually, to get technical here, there is a voiced glottal fricative, which is like a sound of the H. So it should be Vuhledar. And when I say that quickly, it comes out as Vuhledar. It just, it's a slight mispronunciation. It's Vuhledar. Whatever. But the Russians pronounce it, it's transliterated as Ugledar, so Ughledar. So it depends again, whether Ukrainian, Russian. Anyway, Ughledar. This guy says the enemy is holding position in front of us. He says. In fact, let's just skip through what he says. They try to attack every other day. They fail and they suffer losses. And then he goes on to say, there's a forest strip 800 meters ahead. There's an observation point there. And there are about 150 bodies of the enemy left in front of it. That's their losses during the attacks on just one small defensive position, and the attempts failed. So if you can take this guy seriously, and there's lots of dead bodies you can see there in that footage, right? If you take this claim seriously, then yes, the Russians have lost huge amounts. If there's 150 bodies just in one tiny area of Russians, then what does this say about the figures that they release every day, the Ukrainians, and when they have these huge numbers? Then actually that's more evidence to suggest that is at least somewhat accurate. If we carry on with Andrew Perpetua, and come down here to the Vuhledar area, the string of settlements, he says, is a serious impediment north of Vuhledar. He says Ukraine struck Volnovakha multiple times today. That being, well, that would have been yesterday, perhaps with Gimlers. So Volnovakha is just back from Vuhledar, and that's where that's the settlement they used to sort of reinforce the attacks on Vuhledar through Pavlivka and Mikilska. So Volnovakha is just back here. So lots of Gimler's attacks on there. Apparently, that's not unusual. We have that has been hit before. And Ukraine has also heavily shelled Polochy, which is an area just south of Mariupol, over in the here it is, over in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Other than that, I don't have too much information other than a claim about the Kimburn Spit, which is from No Reports, I believe. Let's get their claim of the Spit. Where are you? Or is it Andrew Perpetua? Give me a second. Andrew Perpetua says Ukraine stated today that they destroyed several Russian assets on Kimburn Spit, but I believe this was confirmation of attacks from yesterday and not a news strike. There is activity, there's really constant activity going on the Spit at the moment from artillery attacks from the Ukrainians. They are hitting positions there, and they have made claims previously that it's very difficult for the Russians to do counter battery fire there. This was possibly one area that they were using to attack Ochakiv, which is quite a significant settlement for the Ukrainians. I think it's where their Marines train, and they have some sort of docking facilities there and whatnot. So Ochakiv has been hit quite a lot from the Kimburn Peninsula, but it appears that I get the intuition that Ukraine are starting to get the upper hand in forcing that the Russian artillery back there. Anyway, not too much information about Kherson, Crimea, and Zaporizhia, really. But hopefully that was useful for you. Please like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget you can pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP. If you put the /ATP, then I get a little bit of a commission on anything that is bought from there. Loads of stuff that you can grab. Please check it out. If you want to show your support for Ukraine, then there's plenty of stuff that you can grab from there. So uasupporter.com/ATP. The link is in the description below. As you can see, my Chrome is really rendering very quickly at the moment. It's doing too much thinking. Anyway, thanks again. Really appreciate your support. Please check out my extra video that comes out a little bit later. Thank you to all the members and those who support the channel. Really appreciate it. Anyway, Tool the Pips. I will speak to you later.